All right, so welcome everyone to the second half of this episode of FinOps Friday, where we're here with Thiago, getting a bit of a global perspective, understanding the Brazilian market a little bit more. Thiago, we caught up to sort of prepare for this show a few weeks ago. You mentioned that the pace at which things change. Has much changed in a few weeks? Like, what has changed in the Brazilian market from a couple of weeks ago when we first spoke?
Um, whenever we first spoke, I was telling Nathan how historically cheap and historically easy was to hire from common labor to over specialized labor, and now we got way too cheap. So everything changed. That's why we were talking about this topic in the very beginning of the show. Now it's being hell on earth to hire pretty much everyone in every single open position. Like we said, we've been actually harassed by richer countries pursuing this cheap labor, so that's how fast things can change here.
What's a practical example like? Can you give me an example of, the cost of hiring somebody in a straight out of college university role? Or what's a good way to indicate that and to show how much it's changed?
um, uh, let me think. A senior cloud architect, uh, or a senior data engineer, it is to be something around 1.5 to $2,000 a month for a senior position. Something about $200 or $300 a month for a junior position. And now you were forced to start raising those salaries and trying to compete, but it's unfair competition. Whenever you in this scenario, it's totally unfair. You can offer below minimum wage from almost any developed country and get as much as three developers, from Brazil. So
And do people
things changed
change? Yeah,
really fast.
like you see, you start a job, like this is going to be my salary. Do people then just keep changing jobs so they get like new salaries all the time as well? Does that happen a lot?
Yep, totally.
Yeah, gotcha. So
To-
staff turnover is another problem that you've just got. The hiring cycle is just ongoing.
the turnover in tech here in Brazil, it's really, really high, really high.
Gotcha, gotcha. All right, on to the next topic, the public sector. So
Hmm.
you mentioned, it was sort of briefly discussed previously that the
Hmm.
procurement processes in public sector were very, very different. There wasn't a large number of providers and vendors, which sort of stopped a lot of innovation. Can you give me a brief history of what this previous setup of public sector was like, what that actually resulted in?
Back in 1964, we had this company called Serpro, and the public sector was only allowed to buy technology from this company. Like I said, we had two new procurement laws. Both are accepted today, and multiple ways of competing in the public sector. But things are actually converging for much more of a partnership between the managed service providers that are capable to help the government on their projects. And now we have this uh, the public sector at first they noticed that they are dealing with extremely old technology because of this monopoly, and they got caught utilizing POP3 mail like 2 years ago, and they with all the pandemics and everything else, they were forced to adopt the cloud really fast, and uh, I think it was a really good approach as long as they weren't aware of what they were doing, where they are heading, and how to especially how to forecast those chaotic costs and try to balance the public outcome with the tangible outcome, the product or the project itself. So we had this emerging public companies. One of them is called Etice, Empresa de Tecnologia do Ceará. They will partner up with managed service providers that will partner with cloud vendors and with the public sector in order to bring innovation to the public sector. And just like I said, now the government only had this single point of this single way to buy technology. Now we have this clash of titans, AWS and Google through their managed service providers, and alongside the anti-corruption laws, we're observing a lot of innovation and pretty much a forced accountability and much more clear process on the competition and the bidding process from buying technology, specifically cloud technology.
Yep.
And one thing that's really interesting, you cannot, there's almost a natural way to migrate to the cloud whenever you look to the private sector, lift and shift, then
Yep.
modernizing and everything else. Whenever you deal with all this chaotic scenario, all this budgeting and forecasting problems, and you need to compete with different players that will also try their very best to get those huge government contracts. Everybody's getting really aggressive on a good way, not just to move to the clouds, but modernize and create and adopt the best cloud native practices in order to keep costs in control, in order to proper utilize modern budget tooling, and also in order to create one single view of the budget system, because it will be hell on earth trying to manage all, legacy systems in the cloud and legacy systems on premise and cloud native technologies. So it's pretty interesting. We saw a lot of digital transformation, a lot of digital adoption from the public sector on a really, really good pace and on a really, really transparent and efficient way. I
Yeah,
think,
yeah. Yeah,
but
and in terms of the like, so the public sector, you had the one company, but they seem to just not innovate or do anything whatsoever. Was the commercial sector still innovating and moving ahead, or was technology just a bit stagnant across Brazil in both public and private sectors?
it's complicated. Like always, it's complicated. Whenever we're in the middle of a recession, we had this economic how do I say? Whenever we're in the middle of a recession, we had this economic phenomenon called crowding out. The public sector will improve its expenses
Yep.
in order to keep in order to mm, get the GDP and try to stimulate the economy itself. So we are able to observe some shrinking of the private sector. So I think that the public sector is it's doing quite well on this innovation side, but just like I told you, the public sector is getting a lot of help from the private sector. From this procurement system that allowed the managed service providers to guide the government into this digital transformation.
Yeah, so that was one thing we spoke about before as well. You basically had to be forced. You couldn't purchase, a notebook. Everything had to be cloud. It was basically forced through that much more innovative way and forced that modernization.
Yeah, everything was so expensive and so bureaucratic. On adopting new technologies. Whenever whenever you try to compare adopting a public cloud with the help of a managed service provider and actually setting your goals, and this managed service provider being accountable for delivering those goals, it's a no-brainer on buying a bunch of computers or even a notebook for the government. They everything is so hard and bureaucratic that I think they just gave up on being on premise and dealing with outdated stuff.
Yep.
My theory is just that they just can't handle anymore. They are now the government is now trying to shorten this technology gap and trying to you know we've been forced. The government have been forced, not forced, but you didn't have to go through this bureaucratic process or even a bidding process whenever you buy from Serpro. So Serpro had no incentive in supplying great new technology, and now Serpro still exists. Many government agencies are still able to buy in that way from Serpro, but I think that the maturity of the government itself And even uh, when their intentions are not so good, when they are trying to perpetuate their um, uh,
Or just like the
themselves,
monopoly.
whether they want to perpetuate themselves in the government itself. They
Yep.
just notice that if they are not providing good public services with good public outcome, without so much corruption, without so many outdated technology, even if the motivation itself it's not that noble, uh, we end up in this scenario.
Yeah, gotcha. All right, we're going to take a quick break for the mailbag. This is where we read the questions and feedback you have from previous episodes. We'll pop them in here, so we'll shout across to the mailbag. All right, and welcome to the mailbag. This is for the previous episode we had with Ali Whitman around gamification. So the first question, how do you determine what activity or operational process is best fit for gamification? For this, I'd make sure it's the same as picking a good candidate for a proof of concept or a workload, something like that. You want to make sure that there is some meaningful component to it. It matters that you're successful with this one, but of course you want to sort of gauge that and limit the impact to the business if it wasn't something successful. So make sure it's meaningful, but maybe not absolutely critically in case there are some issues. And I'd also say, this is about doing things differently, making things fun. So make sure it's something that makes the lives of the participants better. You don't want to try and make a fun activity around something that just doesn't impact them or has no bearing on their day-to-day work life as well. So a meaningful application, workload process that makes their lives easier. Are there particular gamification platforms that would be recommended? Look towards your vendors. They may have some things set up, some nice little game days that they've run before. That's probably the quickest and easiest way to get a head start there. But probably the message here is to not get too worried. Start small, look for the outcomes. Let's not burden and make this too much of an administrative overhead when you're starting out. Something small, something neat and easy. Focus more on the outcomes. Once you've got a couple under your belt, then start to get a little bit more fancy in terms of tracking and the actual setup as well. What are the other things you can do to drive accountability across teams? You mentioned recognition and publicity. If there's challenges, opportunities, and you want to increase the accountability, some techniques are, making it that particular team's problem to solve. You've raised some concerns. Okay, this is now your task to actually solve. If you've got multiple teams with problems, maybe you want to swap problems amongst the teams so that not only the team's solving the problems, but they're solving them for the other teams. You're actually contributing, making your fellow teams' lives a little bit better. If you're lacking the accountability, make sure you've got a good, strong, and communicated visioning and understanding. If there isn't an accountability, why isn't it there? Do they understand the why, the vision as to what is lacking there? And then, of course, there's the more generic FinOps components, things like transparency, things like visibility. Is it an actual and accountability issue, or do they not really have enough visibility as to what they should be doing or what some of the issues are? Is gamification primarily focused on optimizing costs? The quick and the easy answer is no, absolutely not. You can gamify anything at all across your business. Look at some of the drivers as to why you're doing cloud. Maybe it's innovation. How can we release features faster? Maybe that's a great way to gamify something that is a benefit to the business and also highly motivating to the users as well. So look at your drivers, why you're going to the cloud, what are some of the things that the business is looking to get out of, and also some of the things that the employees, if this is a great place to work because of the innovation, because of the new technology, maybe you want to gamify that a little bit more. And also look at your people's pain points. What is hampering them? What we discussed in the first question there, you want to make the lives of your participants much, much better and make sure that it's actually enjoyable and meaningful for them. How are you developing your benchmarks for gamifying costs and value generation? So I would be a little bit careful here. Gamification should be something different, should be unique. You don't want to sort of blur it too much with BAU because then it just becomes regular work. You want to have this as very much a separate event or separate item. So don't try and sort of put too many constraints or measures, markers on it. Don't put a metric on fun as much as possible. If you want to put metrics on the gamification, then do it on the actual gamification component. Measure people's happiness, the success of the event or the actual work. Don't necessarily put metrics on the tasks or the outcomes as you would with any other task. So that is it for today's mailbag. If you've got any questions, any feedback, please feel free to reach out to us. feedback@finopsfridays.com. Back to the show. All right, and welcome back. We have the last topic here. Let's talk about budgeting. Brazil, it is such a complex environment to work in. You've got the high inflation. You've got changes in currency conversions. Your cloud bill may come in as a different currency, and even if it comes in the local currency, how did that conversion happen? How does it possible to actually manage a budget? The cost of cloud can vary due to multiple external factors that you've got no control of. So how do you actually make a budget? How do you track to it? How the heck do you do budgeting in Brazil?
Forecasting needs to be extremely accurate, extremely tracking needs to be really sophisticated. And on the architectural side, whenever someone in FinOps Foundation is talking about preemptible VMs in order to save some bucks, I'm go like, preemptible VMs. It's kind of the rule here. You're not allowed to choose anything else. You need to do whatever you need to do with whatever you have, So all this chaos monkey buzzwords, we've been there because we had to, spot stances and creating event-driven architectures and taking care of the security and best practices in order to not to be surprised by a huge bill. It was just like I told you in the very beginning of the episode. FinOps adoption it's really weird here. It's not. It won't follow the FinOps framework. It will follow some survival kind of guidelines. It's complicated. I think all this FinOps shift. Having multidisciplinary teams working together and building wonderful things together is kind of way too far for us. It'll be someone just saying you need to be on budget or else you will be fired, or this company will be bankrupted and nobody will save it. So it's
more of a Hunger Games approach that it is pure, like whatever you need to do to survive, maturity levels, etc. It doesn't matter. It comes down to survival only.
Yeah, maturity levels pretty much do not work on not such a chaotic scenario. Double-digit inflation rate, double-digit interest rate, and double-digit exchange rate devaluation. That's what's happening in Russia right now.
And yeah, exactly. You've been living it for years and years. Do you get odd things like you get billed monthly? That the cost of running something at the start of the month is going to be different at the end of the month. Has there ever been patterns where hey, these are things we do at the end of the month, at the start of the month, because it's effectively going to be cheaper?
Definitely, and sometimes not just cheaper, Nathan. We need some predictability. I promise you that I won't deep dive on tech stuff, but I have to on this very topic. Um, whenever it comes for a API gateway pattern, a event-driven pattern. Um Sometimes I know that our basal cost for creating an API gateway inside Kubernetes, it'll be higher than adopting all no ops, fully managed, kind of stuff. That's wonderful, but when you create something that you can control how your service will, how much it will cost, the scalability, and whenever you can predict your SLA and SLO and fit that inside a budget will definitely affect your architecture. From a baseline, from a American startup perspective, all the serverless architecture with scale to zero makes perfect sense. Things are a little different here. When we need more, when predictability is more important than just cutting costs. That's why I really like that quote from JR and from everybody on the community. It's not FinOps. It's not just about cutting costs. It's finance optimization, and finance optimization is not always cutting costs. Sometimes you need predictability. You need to improve your forecasts. You need to act much more strategically, even if it costs a little bit more, if things are a little bit more complicated to create and to develop on the short term.
Gotcha. And so you're saying there that you'll actually trade off and reduce the system's throughput to be able to maintain costs. Is that something that's commonly done as well?
Pretty much, yes. Me and my colleagues, we discuss that all the time. All the trade-offs on having this kind of brand new approach, this serverless approach, or this scale to zero approach. Uh, it's something really, let's think together. Whenever you have just the cloud cost uh, to control and forecast, forecasting fully managed service is really painful. Whenever you have to forecast fully managed services and inflation and interest rate and exchange devaluation, things are sometimes just unbearable. It's not feasible. You need to bring to a much more straightforward approach. I'm achieving quite the same thing. Creating my own API gateway, utilizing Kubernetes. It won't scale to zero. It will cost a little bit more on the short term, but will make things much more easier to forecast and to control, on the long run.
Gotcha. That long term, and that's sort of why when I did the well architected, everyone was saying, you just need to become elastic, and I sort of separated that. Well, it's sort of two parts. You manage the demand, which can be throttling, which can be buffering, like smooth the demand out so you're not getting those cost peaks. and then match the supply to that demand. Look at it as a two-part problem, not just look at what's coming in and throw resources at it. Actually think about what's coming in and what your limitations are around on those inputs as well. Yeah. Excellent. So that is it for today's episode of FinOps Fridays. As I said before, you've got any feedback, any questions, you can pop us an email, feedback@finopsfridays.com. And thank you very much from our guest from Brazil, Thiago.
Thank you very much for the invite, and it was really nice to share some thoughts on Brazilian economic history, on our chaotic economic incentive systems, and even on those architectural patterns that we were forced to adopt, even if it sounds like a consensus.
Exactly, in any pattern. Excellent. Thank you very much, Thiago.
Thank you.